Welcome to the Future Series, where we talk with real founders about building a business for the future. Whether you are scaling your business currently or starting your first side hustle, we aim to give you the nuggets of information to help you succeed in the future of work. This podcast is brought to you by Bellard Consulting. Bellard works with companies around the world to design, build, and implement AI systems and business processes to help your company run more efficient, effectively, and profitably. Get in touch today by quoting the Future Series for a free systems audit. Now, today we've got David Ribott on the podcast from Ribott Partners. Ribott Partners is an award-winning management consultancy working with clients globally on leadership development and board advisory services. How is it going, David?
Very good. Very good. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you on. I know I gave you a very brief sort of introduction there, but for everyone listening, it'd be great if you could give us an overview of who you are and what you do.
Indeed. So I am the founder and managing partner of Ribott Partners, a board and leadership advisory based in Abu Dhabi, but covering EMEA and APAC. What that really means is while there's a lot of sexy things I can do inside of leadership development and corporate governance, a lot of times we're looking at how well senior leadership teams and how well boards are working in terms of what their mandate is, what the business needs, and the current conditions that they're operating under. And so really pulling that all together. My deep expertise is in leadership development and corporate governance, also strategy and performance. I would say a big portion of the work that clients are hiring us for beyond transformation is helping their leaders perform under duress. And I say that with, in the background, we've got a ceasefire in my part of the world with the war that's going on. Just even prior to that, it was always, how do I help my team? How do I help my leaders downstream perform under duress? Because there's just constant shifts in the marketplace that create stress. So it's a bit of the new normal.
Yeah, I can imagine that's becoming sort of more and more prevalent every day as well. There's new technologies, new AI coming out, shifts in work completely.
And then, to your point, part of it is also what you said inherently is there's a lot of noise, and then being able to discern noise from signal from noise. And that takes a whole nother discipline to be able to discern what's real and what's not, and how to park something before it reveals that it might be a signal, because it doesn't always immediately emerge that way.
Yeah. From this, obviously, it'd be great to take a look back at sort of where you grew up and your sort of early career and how you got to this point and sort of run your own business.
Indeed,
Are you able
indeed.
to give us a quick sort of snapshot of David Ribbo from childhood, where you grew up, and then the early career that you had?
So I was born and raised in New York City. My family's from Puerto Rico. We're Puerto Rican American. Our relationship with the U.S. is we have a tricky relationship. We're a Commonwealth. We're considered the oldest colony in the world, but that's a different topic. I say that to say that my roots are in the Caribbean, Latin America, but I was born and raised in New York City. Very specifically, I grew up near Yankee Stadium, which is in the South Bronx. I'm a kid of the late 70s, but I really grew up as a youth in the 80s and early 90s. It was you don't know what you don't know until you leave and you start to see other places. But it was an interesting place to grow up. You become street smart really fast. Needless to say, I grew up at a time in New York City where gang violence, drugs were prevalent, probably more prevalent then in terms of crime rates than it is today, even though if you look at the stats today in New York, they've gone back to sort of pre-90s numbers. I say that, and I still am grateful for having grown up in that sort of environment because it helped me cut my teeth. I didn't have to learn later how to navigate life because life was there every day. I just was able to see it. It's interesting because I sometimes talk with clients. about politics and being able to read the terrain of your organization's operating system. And I got a lot of that in my early days, getting off the train, coming out of school. And depending on what time it was, I had to figure out which way I wanted to walk home, because while I was never in a gang, I had enough friends at the different gangs. But walking through all of that, if someone saw you say hello to somebody, it could just be taken the wrong way. And that was actually my early foundation in terms of how you read the political terrain in an organization, because I had these relationships and friendships with people who I knew as kids or I used to play football, American football with, that allowed me a little bit of flexibility to say hi to everybody. But if one saw me saying hi to another, it can come back to so it was just really, really interesting. A lot of that stuff, the foundation was set in those days, and that's present day work. But we're going back to the late '80s, early '90s in terms
Yeah.
of me actually learning that.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting how a lot of the early childhood shape who you are for the rest of life and instill some of these key lessons. I was going to say, you mentioned American football as well. Was sports a big part of growing up?
I think, man, I think I don't fall off the cliff, and I don't end up like a lot of my friends did in those days, where either they disappeared, got killed, ended up in prison, the whole checklist of things. I think I stay away from that because I discovered football, and I discovered organized football, not just playing street ball, but actually organized football where you're suiting up, you have practice, you have commitments to your teammates, you have commitments to the coach, you have commitments to your own nutrition, your own hygiene. It gave me a chance to understand that there was a different way of going about things, and I think because of it, it just helped me understand that I could be good at something despite the environment. And in order for me to play football, I had to leave the neighborhood because there was nothing organized. It was funny. When I was a kid, I played for a football team that was attached to the Boys and Girls Club of Harlem, 145th Street, Convent Avenue, and they got their funding through a Baptist church. And so I was immediately, and thrust into that ecosystem of the structure of the Boys and Girls Club, which does a lot of great work. Does a lot of great work in terms of getting kids in those at-risk areas to university and getting them to graduate. And really, in terms of upward mobility, they do amazing things. And then the structure of the church and the support of the church, and these are all strangers for the most part, but you had these people who were truly rooting for you, and you just thought, okay, this is strange. But going back to some of those early day experiences having present day impact or shaping, you learn early on. At least one of the early lessons I learned was not everyone has your best interests at heart, and sometimes strangers can be beautiful people in your lives, and they don't always have to have the same anchor that people in your neighborhood, people in your community, people in your family have for them to have an impact. And two things can be true. Those contradictions are not easy to reconcile, I think, as a young person, but later on you start to make more sense of it and you start to integrate a little bit more. But I think today when we talk about the kindness of strangers, it was really those early days of experiencing that really cemented, yeah, that's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I found it in my life as well. It's when you get someone who's, I've had it before, a complete stranger who I've just met and we have a conversation, and then they say something that makes you think slightly differently, and then opens a different door or a different window to a way to look at the world. You sort of think, oh, that's actually a really good point.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's just changed it.
I think when you're at a coffee shop or sometimes on a plane, you say you just strike up a conversation. You never know where it goes, and I think part of it is that piece that you just shared. That you just never know where a conversation can go. because the person sitting next to you can really ask you the right can ask you a timely question at a point to help you figure something out as well. And I've had that happen, plenty of times.
Yeah. So, moving on from your sporting days then into your early career, how did your career develop into what you're doing today?
So I think initially I was on the back end of football and all that it did for me. I think the 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 thing that it really opened up for me was just discipline. And you can make sense of things. You didn't have to be as talented as most people or others, but discipline really set the foundation for me. And I understood I was always able to be disciplined. But I also recognize people who went above and beyond for me. And I remember in the early days, I had a couple of teachers who, if they didn't step up and or vouch or seek out opportunities on my behalf, I might not have taken certain paths that opened up because of it. So I had this natural pulling to take me into education to kind of do the same thing. So I ended up in education first, and it was just intense because I was working in schools. I was working in the quality of schools that were as bad as the kind of schools I went to. And my God, I never got left back. My education was never disrupted, but I went to horrible schools. My high school was so violent that it was decommissioned after I graduated, so it no longer exists in the form that it did when I went to school. So I ended up in education at that time, and I ended up burning out. And I remember thinking, if I'm going to stay in education, I'm going to need to take a break. And somehow it coincided with me doing my master's degree, this idea that you can live abroad. And I think, this idea of living abroad, the seed was planted while I was still an undergrad because I studied in London while an undergrad for a winter semester. And that's when I first met expats. I didn't know what an expat was. And I thought, oh, wow, you can be American, you can be from, stateside, living in Europe and still do the same job. And I thought, that's interesting. So initially, I wanted to live in Paris, but that just didn't work because for North Americans, it would be easier to get a work visa in Asia. So I ended up deciding on Asia because that's where the roles were being offered to me. But then, once I got to Korea, I ended up with one foot in higher education and then one foot in corporate learning because I started recognizing that traditional education maps into corporate learning. And while I was working at Samsung, I recognized the way that we develop athletes is very similar to the way that we could be developing leaders. And I say that to say that I don't have a traditional HR background. I come to the work of leadership development from a sports background. So before I left New York and before I became a teacher, I was also a sports coach, focused on American football, but also volleyball. And the same way that we would break down skills drills to make sure that the athletes were able to strengthen what it is we needed them to do in games, recognize, you could just recreate that with leaders. And it was just intuitive. And I think a lot of the work that I do today were these intuitive shifts that I can see and connect some dots and then would then go back and formally get some training on. But I think for me, living in Korea was a game changer because that was where I had a chance to work in a corporate environment and saw that the thing that I actually love doing, I can do more here.
Amazing. That's great. I think it's a great way to pull that across as well, involve the way that athletes are developed and bringing that across into leadership as well. How, when you were in Korea then, when did you start Ribot Partners? How far after that was Ribot
Ooh,
started?
so I was in Korea 7 years. Fun fact, I left Korea the year the iPhone dropped. Um, that's a topic for another day, but yeah, that was an interesting thing to see while still being in the country. I ended up in Abu Dhabi January 2008. I didn't start Ribott Partners until 2015. There was a lot of time in between. So when I left Korea to come to Abu Dhabi, I had to choose a path. Whereas in Korea, I could have one foot in higher education and one foot in corporate learning. Uh, there was restrictions on the work visa in those days, and so you had to pick one track. And so I decided to go back into higher education. And in those days, I my career track was a dean's path in leadership. So what we call senior leadership as an administrator in sort of the business of higher education. But somewhere around 2012, 2013, I can feel a pull. Again, I love the ecosystem of higher education. I understand it inside out. I could probably still do it, but something was missing. Something was missing, and I felt the urge to go back into industry. And I think that was what Korea did for me. The years in Korea gave me exposure to industry in a very deep way, where I was able to work with future leaders and future GMs and helping them get into the MBA programs and then bringing them back. And it was something about being in industry that resonated with me because you can see the application of what you were doing and its impact on the business. Whereas in higher education, you're really planting seeds. You know it will bear fruit, but you may not be able to see it bear fruit unless you maintain relationships for at least a decade. I mean, to this day, I still run into some of my ex-students or some of the people that I worked with, and they're, 15 years into their career. They've got families, because in those days I worked a lot with military cadets. And they all have, stars here, and it's an amazing thing to see that they have gray and they've got kids. But that was a long way away, and I wanted to be able to see with immediate effect what this had on their work in the business to continue to strengthen that. And I asked myself the question, when was the last time I was really, really happy at work or with what I did? And I went back to Korea and I thought, okay, fundamentally, what was different? And I was doing more coaching. And so somewhere around 2012 or 2013, I went back and I retrained as a coach. And that took me down the path to where I am today, because every iteration thereafter starts at this point, leaving higher ed, and not with any discontent. I still loved it, but I was in search of something more. I think I left higher ed in 2014. Uh, joined the company in Abu Dhabi, Etihad. I went into aviation. I was there for a little bit of time, but I can see that there was something about being in professional services, not being in-house, internal, that was speaking to me. And so Ribott Partners started in January of 2015. So it's a few months older than my son. So we've
Excellent.
just started year 11 now in 2026.
So taking us back then to that 2015 when you took the plunge, was it something you started on the side and built up, or did you go both feet first?
So that's a good question. There was there was an invitation to be a partner at a boutique. A friend had a boutique. He wanted to expand into leadership development, invited me in. We joined forces, but we hit a down market for what we do in 2015. And as is the case with founders, you start to learn, is this a marriage that can work? And if it's a marriage that can work, what are the boundary conditions for success? And I think what ultimately we realized was, I think he wanted to continue to do something with the way that he shaped the business until that point. I was looking to do something else. And so we had this brief moment in time where we worked together, delivered for clients, and then consciously decided, okay, maybe it's better we separate. And upon that separation, I started Ribott Partners. And I understood that there was a marketplace for working with the bigger firms, because with with my area expertise being based in country, split between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, I was a cheaper alternative as well as my network of associates than it would be to fly in partners from, let's say Singapore, London to do some of the things that I could do or we could do on their behalf. So it was an instant business model that I fell into without really knowing that that was on the table.
So I love that. It's interesting all these different stories around how founders actually start their businesses. There's always different dynamics. A lot of it falls into place. It never goes exactly to plan. Um,
Well, I'll give you a little bit more there. So at the end of the dissolving of that initial partnership, my son was already born. It was a down market. I was able to turn it around, and I learned how to be an entrepreneur. And I thought, okay, let me give this until my son is one, until he turns one. So they gave me almost a year. He turns one, then I was like, okay, I'm getting better at this. Revenue's increasing. Our presence in the marketplace is increasing. Then I said, okay, I'll give it until he gets to nursery, which is another 2 years. By the time he got to nursery, I gave myself another extension of, okay, I'll wait to let me see where we are when he goes to school, like formal school, elementary school. And so I'm an accidental entrepreneur, is what I'm saying. It's
yeah,
just I went with the ebbs and the flows instead of resisting it. And I thought, okay, I'll give myself a timeline. These are some targets that need to hold for me to reconsider and reassess. So I fell
yeah.
into this by accident.
It's great though, because it's a similar story for a lot of entrepreneurs, pulling on past experiences, what they're good at, their uniqueness, and then, like you said, having that itch inside that something was missing or you wanted to do something else, and then actually taking the plunge and going for it, whether it's built on the side or you just jump in. That's a lot of founders find it that way. I guess one more question for you on this bit here is, what was your mindset like at that point in terms of, did you feel in yourself that you've got this, you can back it? I know you said you'd given yourself a until your son was one, but what was going through your mind at that point? Because I'm sure you've got a new kid on the way, you've got to support your family.
It was
I
it
imagine
was
there's a lot of
rough.
stresses.
Yeah, no, good Lord, 2015 was a rough market for, let's say, training and development. Let's just kind of put it in that category in my part of the world. I think I had two deliveries, and they were I had one delivery in Q1 and one delivery in Q2, and the pipeline just looked inconsistent, and it just had to do with buying active buyer appetite. And I just thought, okay, I'm just going to bite the bullet. I'm going to see this through. The year cannot stay this way. So I just committed to staying in touch with clients, still taking them to lunch, still nurturing the relationship because the relationships are real and they still needed help. There was just no budget. But I just made it, I was able to invest in a way didn't that didn't take up too much time, effort, and energy with it almost feeling like a volunteer job, I think. So instead of giving clients 2 hours, I would break it down to maybe 45 minutes, just enough to keep the relationship going, but enough to give them value. And I think that was the decision I made is we're going to still deliver value in spite of active contracts being in place because this can't go on forever. And I just understood that it couldn't go on forever. And then if it did, I'd be having a different conversation with myself, that January. So
Yeah,
I went into that mindset and I said, all right, I know how to navigate this. Because I think the
yeah,
the first thing you need to do initially is you have to move away from the monthly or the weekly check, and you need to look at, 6 month window or 12 month window or year over year. So I just understood it's going to vacillate.
yeah. It's a super important point as well about understanding markets and how they move, because you could be just at the right time and it absolutely boom, but then you've not seen it come down, or you're not prepared for a downward trend in the market. Like, for example, in like COVID, after COVID, when everything shot through the roof in the tech space, and then it dropped again. Um, it's sometimes better to start in a slightly worse market, and if you can get through that, then it's going to go up and up. Obviously, from the sounds of it, with your extensions, the market did get better, and things started improving.
It got better, and I think the feedback that I got early on that I think was part of the USB was, you don't behave like a consultant. And I thought, okay, I can live with that. Because I think I understood what they were trying to say. I didn't come across as I didn't come across as slimy. I didn't represent the work in a zero sum approach. I can't work with you unless we hit this number or you sign with us. I think I was always still grounded in this architecture of being an educator at heart. And that always came across. And fundamentally, yeah, every conversation is an opportunity to provide value. And I've always benefited from an investment of people not asking me to pay them for. And this is again going back to those early days in New York where people invested in me, unofficially as mentors. Some of my early coaches in football, they didn't get paid; they were volunteers. And so I just understood, okay, I've benefited. There were people that did this for me. I can pay this forward. And I'm also shaping what it is I'm offering as well. So there's benefit on two sides. And then, yeah, between you and I, the down market gave me a chance to spend more time with my son, which was a blessing in disguise, I think, because
Yeah,
I got much busier by Q4 of 2015, much busier. And I can see the difference between the time that I was able to spend with him versus how busy I was in Q4. So I'm actually grateful for that time period, and I could look back at it and put it into perspective.
that's great.
But I would be lying if I didn't say that I didn't have my moments. It was like, okay, am I am I am I doing the right thing here? So I did have moments where I had to dig in deep, a lot of reflection writing, a lot of long walks, meditation. So, okay, if you're going to believe in yourself, you're going to have to show that you believe in yourself. And that's it. That's a moment. We have them all the time. It's just, can you recognize when they appear? Because when they appear is really when you have an opportunity to walk your talk, as we say. Yeah, I believe in myself. I have confidence in this. Okay, you have this moment. What are you going to do? And it was refreshing to see that in one of my own moments of duress, I stayed steady.
It's very well testament to your character, but also important to be self-aware, understand what is going on around you, not get stuck in the emotional side of it. I know you mentioned a bit there as well about adding that value and paying it forward. Um, Part of that adding value piece as well. You're an author as well. I didn't mention this before, but
Yes, yes,
you've written one book and then there's another one on the way as well.
yes,
What
yes.
was the first book about?
So I said before that I'm really disciplined. I might be over-indexed on discipline. And from my early days as an educator, I captured data. I think one of the challenges in higher education is that not enough people capture hard data. There's a lot of qualitative research out there, and God bless, because we need all of it. But at least in my specific area, student affairs, I was looking at hard data. And so that discipline of capturing data carried over into the business where I was always tracking what it is I was doing as part of the scope of work for the clients, where things changed, what was the pivot, what was the fundamental thing that we needed to account for. And I always, whether it was qualitative or not, I would always code it in a way that allowed us to track it numerically. And I was just constantly looking at, okay, what made this engagement, whether it was a coaching engagement, whether it was a one-to-one coaching engagement, team coaching engagement, or an advisory retainer relationship over a number of months. Okay, what made this successful versus that one? What made this one what made this one even more impactful? And I say more impactful based on the feedback that I was getting. Can you do that? And essentially, if you're winning new business that you don't bid for, you've done something right inside that client ecosystem. And when those clients are then recommending you or setting up coffee and they're there with you to physically hand you off in the introduction, it's like, okay, something is very different in this relationship. And when I started tracking it, I started noticing certain characteristics, certain behaviors in place. And it wasn't able to make sense of it initially, but I captured enough data so that I started finding patterns and I started putting it together almost like a puzzle. And because I solve for problems, essentially, that's what we do. We solve for problems. We don't always know what the problem is, but we solve for problems. And then we offer solutions that align with where the client is, because it makes no sense to offer a solution that is beyond their readiness or their maturity level. Meet them where they are with their current resources, and you can stretch, but the idea is you stretch where they are by +1 or 2 degrees, not +10. Yeah, +10, you're going to break their back. It would almost be like someone wanting to get in shape and never runs, barely walks, and say, okay, we're going to do 5K today. It's like, it's just too much stress on the heart. And we're setting them up for failure because essentially we're breaking the little confidence that they may actually have. We're not actually cultivating and building from there. Eventually, I ended up with a model. I think 2 or 3 years in, I ended up with a model. And so, what does a good researcher do? You battle test it. And with every new client engagement thereafter, I would bring it and then battle test what held up, what fell apart. And then what fell apart, I would then reshape with new information. I think 5 years in, I had a framework that was solid. I think I stopped testing it around 2019. Somewhere around 2019, it was holding up. And then I think I tested it again for another year because then we fell into COVID. And I was testing it virtually, which is a little bit different than in person. And it held up. The time in between confirming that it held up until I published last year was its own journey. Was its own personal journey. But essentially, the framing of the book all comes from client conversations, client engagements, and this theme just kept coming up. It's like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. It's like, okay. In Arabic, there's this word called halas. In Spanish, it's like ja, or the Italians say basta, basta. In my mind, I just say halas. I'm going to help you stop saying I didn't know that. And so that's where the construct of informed leadership comes from. It's not dogmatic. It's not me preaching. It's just, hey, this is what I've observed works across almost 200 clients. And these are the patterns that I've seen show up, and I've curated in such a way that is easily digestible, no matter where you are in your leadership rank, whether you're a first level leader, next generation leader, mid level leader, or executive. This is what we know that works. It's been battle tested. Do with it what you will, but don't say you don't know. And that's really the framing behind informed leadership. In the background, as I was shaping informed leadership, I had this pull. I have a lot of respect for leaders. I think, because I also say in informed leadership, it's open season on leaders. It's fashionable to criticize leaders. It's fashionable to say, all the ills of the world or due to bad leadership. Some of it is true, some of it's not true. And I think I started noticing that there was something I wanted to say about that. And so the current book project, and I'm halfway done, and I still am good on the timeline of publishing in Q4 this year. So let's check in, hold me to it, because I think once you say something public, you're more likely
Absolutely, this is
uh,
recorded.
to manifest this. So yeah, it's recorded, but I'm aiming to still. I'm doing good time. I'm aiming to have it published by Q4 this year. So essentially, in recognizing that two things can be true, there are bad leaders at the workplace that have downstream impact on employees and direct reports. It is also true that it's open season and there's a misunderstanding on the cost of being a senior leader. And then there are some people that are operating in good faith who don't get enough credit. And this visual of being operating in the arena, almost like the Roman Colosseum, like a gladiator. And so you're almost fighting for your life in many ways. But the moment you step into the Colosseum, or let's say the boxing ring, if you follow UFC MMA, you know what you're walking into. You've got, you can turn around, but you're walking into getting punched. And I started noticing that there were leaders who were saying yes to that, metaphorically speaking, that they accepted that as part of doing good work, this was part of that, that was part of the dance of being a fiduciary leader. And I wanted to capture that, and I wanted to be able to reflect what it takes to be a leader in the arena, and recognize when you're in the arena and people who have something to say may not also be in the arena. They may be spectators. And so where is there real signal, going back to what we were talking about earlier, and where is there noise, and being able to push out the noise and really focus on the signal, but really draw in on, okay, if you want to be a leader in the arena, whether you're currently there doing well or struggling, let's take it apart and build it up in the way that we build up athletes. Okay, what needs to be true? What needs to be in place? And I think fundamentally, one of the things, going back to a question I think you asked earlier, I came across a Stanford professor's work, Jeffrey Pfeiffer. Uh, he wrote a book called Leadership BS, and the name alone just made me smile. And I thought, all right, I'm buying this. And every year I re-listen to it. I have it as an audiobook. I re-listen to it every year. I re-listen to The Art of War. I also re-listen to some classics around Stoicism. And there was something about that book, and I don't know if that was the intention of the book, because I don't think it was, but it took me to a place where I recognize, okay, part of my job now and the work that we offer our clients is how can we help them be more effective when they're operating in a space where not everyone's a good faith actor. And that book helped me to understand the relationship between leadership, of being an effective leader, and how power dynamics can get in the way with that. So fundamentally now, when we talk to clients, I say, listen, you don't have to compromise your ethics, but if you want to be an effective leader, you do have to understand how power dynamics work so that you can navigate it. So what is the terrain? Going back to what I said earlier, coming back from school, high school, getting off the train and having to figure out which street I was going to take to get home, because there was a terrain I needed to navigate. To just say that my ethics doesn't align and I don't play politics and I don't do that, is setting up your business unit and your team downstream. You're setting them up for headaches. You're not setting them up for success. Fundamentally, you need to know where all the bodies are buried. You need to know if there's any historical tension that exists cross-functionally, especially if you're a new leader heading that business unit. You may need to know where things have gone sideways. And this has nothing to do with playing politics, but you do need to do your due diligence. And so I frame a lot of this work around being able to do your due diligence so that you have a clear pathway for what it is you're trying to do, understanding where the landmines are. Because if you step on one accidentally, even if it's accidental, the moment you pull your foot off, metaphorically, it's catastrophic for not just you, but your team, because no one works in isolation. Organizations may have issues with silos, people working teams or functions working silos. But most metrics or most projects, most initiatives are cross-functional. If a company has products, then they're probably working cross-functionally with their risk team, because their risk team is then looking at what is your exposure to some of these products that you're putting into the marketplace. So there's always going to be this natural tension. You need to know how to navigate that. Because even if someone is not bad faith, you're not always engaging with people at their best, which then means you need to know how to navigate that as well. And just saying you're not going to play politics can sometimes create tunnel vision and blind us from some of the opportunities to build bridges where we might not see there's opportunity.
Yeah.
The last thing I'd land on, because I think this piece is important as well, is to help some leaders who have trouble with this. I land on self-defense. My son is turning 11 next month, and he has two anchors for sports. One is American football, and then the other is jujitsu. Jujitsu is a non-negotiable because everyone needs to know how to fight. Not because they have you're going out looking for fights, but you need to know how to fight because you need to have the confidence in yourself that you know how to navigate tricky situations. Not that you need to fight, but more often than not, if you come across someone who has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Taekwondo, Karate, knows how to box, they generally are de-escalating before things escalate. And as a last resort, would they put their hands up? And I think that's the framework that I use when I am trying to help leaders understand. You need to understand this from a self-defense perspective, because whether someone is using power dynamics against you or understands the art of dark psychology, where they can manipulate you into thinking something is your idea, but in fact they're stewarding you in a very specific direction. They may not be your best interest, but it's theirs. You need to be able to recognize the telltale signs so that you don't fall victim to it.
Yeah. And all of this as well can obviously be translated over to founders or growing companies when you're starting to employ people and building all of that out yourselves. And it's, I imagine, very, very important to understand this probably before you start building out your teams and your different areas so they don't become so siloed and it can all work nicely and in harmony.
Indeed, indeed. I think in the very beginning, yeah, a lot of founders are passionate, especially around tech. They're passionate about something that they're happy to put 23 hours of their day to and not still be tired. That's a great place to be. But the natural ebb and flow of going from 0 to 1 or maturity level of the company from 1 to 2, each of those asks a different question of the founder. And those inflection points are really different. You may have had a strong relationship with your founding partners, but you may find 2 or 3 years in, much like an intimate relationship where there's a legal marriage in place, you may have to revisit, okay, are we in this together? Is it till, death do us part? And as much as there's heartbreak around breakups and divorce, we have to sometimes look at that. And so the decision, whether it's the decision to partner with someone as a founder or the decision in life to partner with someone as your life partner, how we screen for that on the front end is really important. And I find that the the acumen around that isn't as strong as it needs to be to soften or prevent some of that heartache from occurring later.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a lot of jumping into partnerships early without understanding, and a lot of people are young who set up companies or found it with friends, which can cause all sorts of different dynamics, especially if you're not really upfront and clear about each founder's relationship. This is what we're responsible for,
Yeah,
having
equity.
a proper shareholders agreement, all of those sorts of things.
I forgot. I didn't share this, but we talked about it previously. I come from family business, and so a big portion of our client base at Ribott Partners are family businesses, or family enterprise, or family offices. And I can relate in a very unique way because I grew up in family business on my father's side of the family. On my mother's side of the family, we were poor. So I had this contrast of two worlds. My father's side of the family, both he and his brothers were all financially successful. They all ran their own businesses. But what I also noticed as a youth, and I wasn't able to put it together then, but I can see it now because I can advise clients in a very unique way. And I don't think I've ever shared this publicly, but and God bless my father. My son's going to turn 11 next week. I'm sorry, next month. My father's only ever met my son once. And there's no malintent, but there is something around when the relationships inside family business, because you're juggling three things. You're juggling your relationship in the family, you're juggling the business, and then you're also juggling your role in the business. And when you're not able, to your point, create guardrails around where things start and stop, and then almost balance, almost with like a juggler's mastery, all three balls at the same time without panic, something's going to fall through the cracks, or all three might fall. And suffice to say, I think I I observed a lot from an entrepreneurship perspective, but the relationship was always strained. There's peace between us, but we don't have a traditional relationship. And it's had a downstream impact on his ability to be in my son's life, rightly or wrongly. And so when I look at clients today, especially in the family business, family enterprise or family office realm, I can have those heart to hearts because when whether you're looking at succession planning of an aging founder, did you set your kids up for success? What did you set them up for success beyond sending them to the best schools? Because sending them to the best schools is one thing, but was there space for them in the business that allowed them to grow? Did you want them in the business? That's a different question. Not all, not all founders and family businesses want their kids in there. They want them to benefit. I think that piece is true, but they don't always want them in there because there is this tension between I know what I'm doing, I want it done a certain way, and having someone who didn't really roll up their sleeves and put in the sweat equity and the sleepless nights to build this thing that is not successful, and telling me because they have an MBA from an Ivy League school, this is what you should be doing. And that's just natural tension with an employee and a line manager. If you factor in the family dynamics and then the cultural dynamics of being from Latin America, and I find that the cultural expectations or the cultural norms of Latin American countries and what we call collegiate Gulf states or Levant, like Levant, or Mediterranean, we have a lot in common. We have a lot in common in those respects. And that experience, having grown up in family business, but not being included in the family business and not being set up for success in the business, gives me a unique perspective in the way that we're able to advise our clients in terms of how to reconcile tension, how to set up governance that then protects against emotional decision making, and also just saying, like, flat out, listen, I know you love your family, and if you want to have a relationship with your grandchildren or have them afforded the opportunity to benefit from your hard work, you're going to need to professionalize your governance.
I imagine AI coming in now is accelerating, especially family businesses, the younger generations that are now starting to grow up with this whole new way of working, and older generations who have done things the same way for many, many, many years. It's all converging at the same time, and there's lots of new ways of working that are going to have massive disruptions across the world. How are you finding that?
Indeed. So and going back, and again, we're talking about noise and signal, and I tell a lot of clients, breathe, slow down. There is signal, and then there is noise. Do your due diligence. Whatever you do around tech, you still need governance. It's fantastic you want to explore AI, but if your corporate governance sits in a file deck and is not applied and you're not tracking its maturity, doesn't matter what you do. If you bring in this new tech or if you do digital transformation or if you're migrating from one ERP system to another, you're gonna run into headaches and you're not likely to be successful in that transformation anyway. So you've got to take stock of where you are versus where you want to be and have an honest audit around how strong is our architecture. You know, if it is a family business, do you have a family charter in place? that allows for how it allows for clarity on how decisions are taken by family shareholders. Because the adoption of AI can't be done by a single person in those environments. And then what is it you want AI to do for you? It's one thing to be open to it, it's another thing to adopt it wholesale. What do you want AI to do for you that right now is a problem that it solves for? So just keeping it really simple and going back to the way that the Stoics think, what's the first principles problem that this opportunity solves for? And it's just, again, going back to, being disciplined and looking at, looking yourself in the mirror and just really answering the question, what needs to be true for us to take AI seriously or any new tech adoption seriously? And a lot of times it comes down to what's the internal structure around governance? Because to adopt anything that is tech related requires that there's architecture in place. And if you have architecture, you need governance to allow there to be guardrails in place so that if one level of governance fails, let's say the physical leadership decision making, you have a process in place that allows for another fail safe so that you don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah, super interesting. I'm sure we could go on for delve
Indeed,
really,
yeah.
really deep into it. I know as we sort of round off this podcast today, if anyone's listening who was keen to sort of reach out or get in touch, or even as well buy your book, what's the best way to get in touch with you, and where can we buy your book?
So David Ribot, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram. I have a public profile, ribottpartners.com. And in terms of finding the book, we're distributed at most online retailers, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, depending on where you are in the world. We also have small boutiques, but you can find us at Amazon.
Excellent. And then Q4 is when we'll be able to get your next book.
Indeed, indeed. I have a working title in place. It's not solid, but I think the ethos there is the ethos is there. Really, the framing is, you know, what does it mean to be a leader in the arena? How do you discern noise from signal, and what needs to be true for you to build up your internal capacity to be successful there? Because not everyone you come into contact with will be a good faith actor.
Fantastic. Well, we might have to get you back on after that's come out, and talk a bit more about it.
That'd be amazing.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, David, for coming on today. It's been really, really interesting conversation, and good to talk through everything.
Well, thanks for having me, Anthony. And to all the viewers, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.